Hi, welcome to BoomerTech Adventures mini course devoted to taking fabulous pictures of the flowers, plants, and the animals all around us. This is one of 4 videos. In it, we are going to focus on 3 camera settings that will help you take better pictures. This is Jill from BoomerTech Adventures. Let's get started. So here are our topics today: focus, exposure, and HDR. Now, do you know that you have the ability to choose which part of your picture will be the most in focus? Well, this is how you do it. When you turn on your camera app, and I suggest that if you don't have your iPad or iPhone with you, that you stop the video, go get it, and come back so you can follow along. So when you open the camera app, and you aim at a particular scene, if you tap on the screen, you will see a yellow box. There's a yellow arrow pointing to it in the image on your screen. It's not very bright, the box, but if you look, you'll see it. Now, what you need to know that if you don't take control of that box, it goes into autofocus. The software decides on the focus, and it tends to look for the middle distance. That means everything else, it's not really fuzzy and out of focus, but it's not as sharp as it might be. So this is what you need to do. Decide on what you're going to take a picture of, and what is it in that picture that you want to be the sharpest. Then tap on that part of the image, and this yellow box should appear. You can move the box by simply tapping the screen where you want the focus, the sharpest focus, to be. Don't slide your finger. Actually, just lightly tap, and you'll see the yellow box move around. Now, in this image, I've chosen to focus on this cute little plant, and so I've tapped right on it, and the yellow box appears. Now, when I take the picture and look at the finished product, you will notice that those things which are in the front where I had tapped on the focus box are in the sharpest view. Everything else is kind of fuzzy or blurred in the background. Here's another view. On the left is a flowering quince from my garden. I got up very close to it. I tapped on where the orange flower was. The yellow box appeared. I took the picture, and you can see the only thing that is really sharp is what's right in the foreground. Everything else is blurred in the back. Now, the picture on the right was taken by Beth Como, who is actually a professional photographer. And she is focused on a branch, and again, she is focused right on the foreground. And so even the beautiful white flowers in the back have become a bit blurred. Now, when you look at this picture, where do you think I had the yellow box? Because you notice that the way foreground is blurry, and the background tends to be sharper. Well, if you thought that I had focused right on that yellow and white petunia on the left, you're absolutely right. That's why that left quadrant, upper quadrant, is in focus, and everything else is a little blurred or fuzzy. In this case, once again, I put the yellow box on something right in front of me, but it wasn't the things that were just in front of me. That's sort of, I won't call it middle distance because it's really not the middle distance, but it's a little bit back from the foliage that was right in front. That's where the yellow box is. So again, I got the effect that the leaves in front become a little blurred, a little fuzzy, as in the background. So you can really have a lot of fun with this focus box. And of course, one of the great things with digital photography is when you look at it, if you don't like your result, you can delete it. Now, it would be the same thing if you're taking pictures of animals. Isn't this a wonderful picture of an owl by Chris LeBay? Again, focused right on the animal, everything else is blurred. Now, it might be your family pet where you're doing this, or the parakeet that lives in a cage, or perhaps it's a bird at a bird feeder. Think about where you want that yellow box. Now, besides focus, we can also control our exposure. And if you look at that yellow box, you will notice right to the right of it on your camera app screen that there is a slider bar. And if you run your finger slowly up and down it, you will notice the screen will get lighter the higher you go, and it will get darker the lower you go. Don't try to move the yellow bubble. That doesn't move. You just slide your finger up and down, and you can control the exposure. So let me show you a couple of examples. Again, pictures from my garden. The one on the right is one that I played with the exposure and made it a little lighter. The one on the the one on the right is the one that was natural light, and it's in the shade, so you see that it's a little darker. In fact, up at the top in that upper left-hand corner, all we see is deep shade. But when I played with the exposure on the one on the left, I was able to lighten things up. Again, you have to play with it and decide what you like. So here are two pictures, identical place, identical time, played with the exposure, and which one do you like? Some people like the one on the left, which is a little lighter, where I had moved the bar up a little bit, and some people like the one on the right, where I moved my finger down the bar and made it just a touch darker. So it can be subtle differences, or it can be extreme. It's up to you. You just got to go out and play. Here's another case. The one on the left is actual light. It was pretty bright sunlight. I thought I'd play with exposure, and I made it darker. Looking at this, I think I really like the actual light better, because I can see the petals on the marigold more distinctly than I can on the one on the right. But again, it's something to experiment with. Now, the third camera setting that you will find helpful is HDR. That stands for High Dynamic Range, and you can see the definition on the screen. HDR, or High Dynamic Range, stands for the range of light either the human eye or a camera sensor can pick up. Now, this is what happens when you have it turned on your iPhone or your iPad. It takes 3 pictures, an underexposed, an overexposed, and the middle. And then it combines it into one image. The software figures out what will make the best image. And the result is more details both from the shadows and from the bright conditions show up. Again, something to play around with. So when do you use HDR? Well, the experts suggest when you have multiple light levels. Sunsets, landscapes, it helps you make sure that the land in the distance doesn't just turn up as a dark blob, that you can see some details, or that the sky does not become overly dark. On bright sunny days, it helps with the sunlight reflecting off light colors like flowers, or this, although we're not talking about portraits, when you take pictures of people on sunny days, if you have HDR on, it helps eliminate their faces being in the shadow, and you see more details of their features. Also, in low light and backlit situations, it's good to use. Once again, lightens up the detail. Where do you find HDR? Well, we're looking at an iPhone screen, and it's up at the top. Now, you see on the right it says Auto, because I've tapped on Auto, and that means that the software is going to make the decision whether or not to use HDR. The one on the left is not highlighted, and that means that I don't have it on auto, and I make the decision. Now, some devices, it doesn't show up just as you turn on your camera app, and so you have to touch the screen, not the shutter, but the screen, and it should show up. On the iPad, it looks a little differently. You will see the second icon down says HDR, and it has a line through it, which means it's turned off. Now, it will tell you it depends on which device you're using. Your screen may not look exactly like mine or work just like I have described, so you may have to play around with it, but it's there. Now, if you have an iPhone, you have some control in the settings. So if you go to Settings and scroll down to Camera and tap on it, you will see this screen. And you will notice down at the bottom it says Auto HDR. That means if you tap on it and the little button turns green, you are saying, okay, camera app, I want you to make the decisions when HDR is on. I'm not going to worry about it. If you have it turned off, white, like you see on the screen, that means, okay, I've decided I'm going to take control of HDR. There's no right or wrong. You experiment, see what you like, what you feel comfortable with. And then the last one says keep normal photo. Now it's important to read the small print. Always in settings, read the small print. HDR blends the best parts of 3 separate exposures into a single photo. Save the normally exposed photo in addition to the HDR version. Now here you have to make a decision. If you turn this on, it means that you are saving 2 images. May not be a problem for most people, but if you take a lot of pictures and you sometimes get that message, you're running out of space, then you need to think about, do you need to keep both pictures? On the iPad, it's a little different. You don't have the same choices. The only choice you would have is keep the normal photo. But it's always a good idea to check out the settings on your apps. Now, let's look at some examples from HDR. And I think this first one is probably the best example I can show you. Again, pictures from my garden, which is often a shade garden, but there is speckled sunlight. So if you look at the picture of the image on the left, you will see that there are some daylilies there, but notice that the sun is reflecting off the yellow and is washing out the color totally. Also, the hosta is a little dark, and down at the bottom, there's little white foliage, and that's washed out. Now, if you look on the right, you will see that when I have HDR on, the yellow is much more vibrant. The hosta has more detail, as does the background, and those little leaves down in the front are not so washed out. So again, I played around, which one do I like, which one am I going to keep? Here's another example. This is landscape. I have HDR on the image on the left and it off on the right. And it gives a totally different feeling to the images depending whether I have HDR on or off. On the right, the blues of the water and the sky are more intense, but the foliage in the front is pretty dark, as opposed to the one on the right, the one on the left, where the foliage, you can see more details, but the blue it's still a pretty blue, but it's not as intense. So again, it's experimenting, deciding which image you like best. And it's your picture, so you get to decide. Now, there is a warning with HDR. First, it takes longer to take a picture. Well, I have to be honest with you. I can't tell the difference. But if you have HDR on, you want to make sure that you hold that iPhone or iPad as steady as long as you can. And as I mentioned before, it does take, if you keep both pictures, it does take up more storage. So my big idea for today with this particular video is Use the focus, use exposure, and use HDR to create stunning photos. Play around with them and have a good time. And remember, you can always delete the ones you don't like. But think about your focus, think about your exposure, and do you want to use HDR? Remember, there are additional videos in this series, in this mini course, and they're listed here below. We hope you will take the time to watch all of them and practice some of the ideas and strategies mentioned. We hope you're finding this mini course helpful, and why don't you check us out, BoomerTech Adventures, on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, as well as our website, BoomerTechAdventures.com. Again, this has been Jill. Thank you for watching.